Hey, what's up? I'm back for the last portion of the SteinJager review. This is going to be basically a full-on review of each part altogether from the SteinJager 4-inch lift. I did a few separate videos just showing you the major flaws in some of the areas. And I kind of want to go through and just show you what it was like. If you don't already know, I put these on in December. No, I ordered them in December. I put them on in early January 2021. The truck's been down all of April, so they ran middle of January, all of February, and all of March, 2.5 months. And I reached out to SteinJager. Like I said, I told them I would tell everybody that they did respond quickly the second time after they said they'd been trying to get a hold of me since January or something. And they were unable to get a hold of me. But once I started posting videos, and then they responded. They called me. So they did respond quickly, and they were willing to refund the money for this particular set. And I was going to leave it at that, but then I got a response about why these joints are supposed to crack. And I was like, you know what, whatever. I was just going to let it go. But I feel like everybody needs to know what these are and what happens if you run them. If you buy them and you put them on your truck, the only reason you're going to be buying them is because they're coded. And I admit the color coding is cool, whatever. But I hope you don't plan on driving your truck. So we'll start with the rears, the rear uppers. Let me get you down here. Okay, so the rear uppers, the joint held up pretty good compared to the fronts, as you'll see. It didn't really separate. The problem with the rear uppers is pretty clear. It's not necessarily with the joint in these. It's with the actual bushing itself and with this joint here. It's completely rounded off. It's uneven. There's crack, big chunks missing out of it. You can see it's been sheared off. This is after a very short period of time. Every side looks the exact same way. This is the rear upper. Frame side was a little bit worse than the axle side. The axle side, let me try to get in there. The axle side, there is no joint. It's just basically worn right away. Okay, so that's those. The lowers, rear lowers. Again, the weld held up. The rear lowers, though, as you can see, are welded 360 degrees. In their response, they said, well, they couldn't weld the front uppers without putting on a bigger head. And I'm like, well, that's not my problem. They're basically saying, they are saying, and I had the email, that they were meant, that they know that the 360 degree weld is going to create a stress point in the uppers, which I'll be showing you in a minute. These ones still, the joint ground right off. Just don't expect there to be any joints. It just grinds right away. And then when the rubber rubs on the metal, it squeals really loud. As far as the rear lowers, they held up except for the joint. Except for the bushing. A big chunk of it came out. So I guess they didn't really hold up at all. This is in less than 3 months. What I meant by hold up is the joint didn't crack. I would not run any of these ever. So same thing with the other one. The lowers held up a little better in the rear. Again, but the joint ground down. It's basically nothing. So it's just poly bushing on the frame, and it squeals really loud, especially if you get them wet at all. So that's the condition of the lowers. The other end looks pretty much the exact same way. So besides the giant chunk and the bushing worn down, that was all the damage on those. And then we'll go to the rear track bar. Rear track bar, bushing shredding off. Okay. And This one actually locked in, unlike the front one, which I'll show you in a minute. The front one, the lock nut, even though it worked, it pressed the metal and created a gap, so it just spun right off. These lock nuts actually held up, but if you look at the bushing still, I mean the joint, if you look at the joint, it's completely sheared off again. These bushings held up a little bit better, but it's only been 3 months. I mean, what are the expectations? That we can, you know, buy this kit, and it's pretty high price. We can buy this kit, and it's our fault if we drive the truck. Okay, so here you go on this joint right here. Another one. If I get it nice and high, you can see where it cracked, and they argue that that's not a crack. That's because we can't weld 360 degrees across. Well, if you take a look at their weld, let me jump you down a little bit. If you take a look at their weld, you can actually see on this one that it started to crack into the weld beyond what they're claiming to be an unwelded joint. It doesn't matter what the logic behind it is, the engineering logic. They crack, and that's all there is to it. And if you want to run ones that crack and fill with water, and look, I'll turn this, you just saw one side. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble there. Just saw one side. Okay, you just saw this side right here. Turn it over. Other side's the exact same way. And they can argue all they want that these are cracked because they were overloaded. Dude, that means if they were overloaded, then the weight of my Jeep is too much for them, and they shouldn't even be on there in the first place. They're like, oh, well, yeah, we couldn't weld 360 degrees because it would interfere with the bushing. So put a bigger fucking head on there. That's what everybody else does. So that's the case of those. Or that's the rear track. Alright, sorry, I got cut off there. The phone rang. Anyway, on to the rear uppers. I mean the front lowers, sorry. The front lowers fare pretty much like the rear lowers. The bushings peeling off. There's no structural cracks. The joints are worn down. There is no joint. It's just straight up bushing on metal. I don't know, that's the way they were supposed to be. If it is, then it is, whatever. The front lowers, they're a little bit deformed. Other than that, they're complete shit, but whatever. This one's pretty much the same. The joints sheared off, it's uneven, it's worn down. The bushings, this is the only one that has a joint on all of them, and it's barely anything at all. So the bushings are pretty much worn down. They're pretty warped. There's chunks missing out of them. This one's got some damage here. You can see that. Got some damage. No structural cracks. So that's that. That's the lower. Now on to the front uppers. This is what they sent the response to. In the other video, you can see the response that they said to me, word for word. Here's the cracks, and they say these aren't cracks. It's because they can't do a 360 degree weld. Well, I don't really care whether they can or can't. I don't want to run, and you shouldn't run. No one should run control arms that have a crack in them. These things were full of water. Water's going to rust them out and drive it down the road. You don't think this is a structural weakness? Seriously, do you know anything about torsion at all? Same on this one, started to crack here. It's going to lead. Where do you think these cracks would have led if I would have left this on there for another month or 2 months or 3 months or a year? So if you buy these, what? I'm wrong for expecting to get more than 3 months use out of them? Somehow they try to make it like it was my fault. Same with the bushings, they're all ground off. These joints, they just pop right out now. So those were under some serious stress apparently. Other side, the exact same. Nice fat crack in it, full of water. Turn it over, fat crack, full of water. Bushings pretty much fared the same. These ones held up a little bit better. They didn't shear off, but who cares? I mean, they are what they are. Anywhere there's a crack in your control arm is a structural weakness, and all the stress is going to go to that crack because it's not evenly distributed. Okay, so on to the front track bar. Okay, the front track bar, this is the lock nut. It's locked in place, but I can still turn this. Okay, why can I still turn this? Well, because it pushed this metal it pushed it back and created a gap between there, and now there's a big sharp lip on this, so it was not strong enough to hold the weight of my front end. Pushed it back pretty far, broke it loose. So expect this even with the lock nut. Loctite, it's red Loctite on there. Expect it if you do any off-roading or even drive your vehicle at all. You can expect it to come undone. So I'm sure, you know, if you wrenched it hard enough, you could get it tightened back up, whatever. But as far as the bushings, these bushings fared okay. They didn't really fall apart too much on the front. I don't really have a lot to say about them. They held up all right. So if you wanted to run this, if you like the color and you don't do a lot of hardcore off-roading, even though I really didn't, but sometimes I do, but I didn't in this particular case do too much off-roading. You know, if you want to run these and you don't rock climb or do anything like that, I guess, you know, but again, if you do run these, this is what you're going to get. Another crack joint in the front. Now you can't sit there and tell me that these cracks are not structural weaknesses. So if you know anything about torsion at all, if you have one end is fixed, okay, it's bolted to the frame, and both ends, there's going to be torsion on both ends. The outermost part of the tube is going to be the weakest, okay? That's why they use a hollow tube. If they use a solid tube, when you had too much torsion, it would just crack right off. Hollow tube is much stronger for this type of articulation. But anytime you have a crack in there, it's a structural weakness, okay? So the up and down motion is probably going to hold up, and I say probably because I'm convinced those cracks would have cracked well into the welds really, really fast in the next couple of months, in the next couple of weeks. But if you have any side-to-side motion like articulation, if you do any off-roading at all, there's no weld here to support this joint. Okay, that's by their own admission. They don't want to weld here because they don't want to put a bigger head on there. All they needed to do was put a bigger head on this and put better joints in there. That's it. And they could probably save their company. But at this rate, my guess is they're going to go under if they continue to sell pieces like this. The only parts of theirs I've seen that were really had decent ratings were people who look like, through their Facebook pages, they don't even off-road. So they have really good color coding. If you don't off-road, you want to color code your Jeep, they have a lot of options. But if you even want to drive it on a dirt road, or if you have one bump in your driveway, I wouldn't get these at all. Now, on to the springs in the last segment. Okay, the springs, I'll give credit where credit is due. The springs were fine. I could have ran these. The springs were part of the kit. Otherwise, I probably would have left them on. I like the green. They gave me a nice tall lift. They were sturdy. I've never had any problems with them. There was no warping or anything like that. The springs weren't bad. I don't really have anything to say about them. The paint held up okay for the climate that I'm in. Just a brush would clean these up. The only thing I will say about getting the color coding is right off the bat, even during installation, you can expect to chip them, okay? That it's just going to happen. But I combed these over so well looking for any structural weaknesses, and honestly, I didn't find any. So if you wanted to go with their springs because you wanted colored springs, I'm not saying to trust this company because I don't know what they would look like in 6 months or a year. All I can say is what they look like right now, and to me, they look fine. I could compare them to Rough Country. If you'd like to see one of those, how Rough Country springs held up versus those. Here's a rough country. I got some rough country springs in the garage here. I ran these for 2 years. Just about. Almost 2 years. And the thickness of the two, almost identical. The Steinjagers are a little bit thicker. Obviously, this is one front and one back, but here, let me move this over so you can see. Sorry. I always go the wrong direction. All right, so the Steinjagers are a little bit thicker. This is a front and a back clear. Here, let me get the back. All right, Steinjager, a couple differences. Steinjager's got a longer coil, and it also has less coils. So don't let it trick you. The less coils they make, the less material they have to use. It's a cheaper way of making these. But the thickness is a little bit thicker. Overall, I ran these for 2 years, and they didn't have any nicks, barely any dings, nicks. There's absolutely one thing I will say, there's not a drop of rust on these. And that's driving them in Houston, where it's rainy, and Arizona, where there's severe heat, but almost no rain where we were. They don't have any rust, and that's after 2 years. These have rust all over them, all over the bottoms, all over in here. One of the front ones is pretty much covered in rust. It's got rust all over. I don't like rust, and you shouldn't either. So I'm not saying rough country's better. I'm just saying that at least rough countries didn't rust out. If you're looking for more of a budget buy, 2 of these will cost you about, I think, what was it, 200 some bucks. On Steinjager, they'll cost you 510. So I'm not running rough country. I'm just going with metal cloak all the way around. Metal cloak brackets, metal cloak track bars. Since I went with their control arms, they have 360-degree welds, big fat heads on them. Strong, sturdy, adjustable, and the metal cloak control arms were 1,100. Steinjagers were a little over. They were almost 900 plus tax. So for $300 more, you can get a real control arm. So I hope they make some changes, because I like the color coding. I like that they build them in house. They're American made. But just because it's American made doesn't mean I'm going to run an inferior control arm. So thanks for watching, and I'll have some installation videos for the metal cloak, springs, track bar, and control arms here in the next couple weeks. Don't forget, Steinjagers trash.